Welcome to About the Winelands. In this show, we will be chatting to leaders, influencers, wine producers, restaurants, and other role players. Tune in every week for our latest episode. You will find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram TV, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Google Podcast. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to About the Winelands. Today I'm talking to Johan Malan. Johan is the owner and winemaker at Simonsig Wine Estate. Welcome to About the Winelands, Johan.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you for having me, and it's a great pleasure to be here.
No, it's we appreciate it, and I'm sure our listeners appreciate the fact that you are taking the time to speak to us, and I'm sure they're going to be very interested in learning more about Simonsig and the fantastic history of Simonsig and stuff like that. Johan, can you start by telling us, a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved in the wine industry and things like that?
Yeah, we're a family-owned wine estate, and my involvement here goes back to when I was born, actually, and grew up on the estate, and basically with wine in my blood from the date of birth. I did consider other options as a career, but I think wine is something that is a lifestyle, and that's what attracted me to go and study winemaking at Stellenbosch University after finishing school in Stellenbosch. And the other thing that I think played a big role is that because on a wine farm like this, during December holidays, there's no holiday because it's peak season before the vintage arrives, and we were also farming deciduous fruit in those days. That December's when the schools closed, we started working with my father on the farm, doing irrigation, picking fruit, and I think that's how you grow to love the involvement and all the processes that it entails. And I think that's very stimulating because winemaking is a very different type of farming because on the one hand, you're working with nature. You are close to the soil, you plant the vineyards, make wine eventually, and then in the end, what makes wine so unusual is that you actually share it with the end consumer, the wine lover. And I think the way that you interact with the consumer is something that distinguishes wine farming from many other types of farming. And also through that, you meet wonderful people, and people who love wine are also people who enjoy a good life, the lifestyle, good food. So I think I've never regretted the fact that I decided to become a winemaker. There was only the one concern at one stage that we were three brothers, and if we all decided to become winemakers, that would have been a bit of a family fight in the end.
And that's very interesting. Johan, it's interesting that you say, I never thought about it like this. A winery is unique in the way that you interact with your consumer, because obviously the finished product, on a estate especially, is made. Where most farmers, if you're a wheat farmer, you don't make the bread; you just provide the wheat somewhere.
Yes, I think the whole concept of making wine and putting it in the bottle is what brings you to that position where you're adding value, you're creating a name of your estate. So that's a brand that becomes established in your market. And as we are uh, exporting to so many countries, the name Simonsig travels all over the world. And I think all of that is something very special because it's also something that goes from one generation to the next. If you speak to people like Piero Antinori in Italy, I think they've been doing it for 16 generations. So it's something that becomes an heirloom that goes from the one generation to the next. So we are only in our fourth generation now, so there's lots of room for further development down the line. Yeah, that is something that I think is pretty unique to wine.
It's interesting. I've spoken to quite a few winemakers and estate owners, and one of the things that people always say, they see themselves more as custodians of history rather than owners of something.
Yeah, we always say we are not um, the owners. We are actually just looking after the property for our children, because I think that's any wine grower's dream, is that his children will take over from him and take it into the next generation and expand it, grow it, and also make it more successful. I think in farming it often works like that for other types of farming too.
That's very true. So, talking about that, can you give us a little bit of a history of Simonsig? I mean, it has a fantastic history, and I think people would love to hear more about the history of this estate.
Yes, the estate is was originally part of the bigger farm called Kulenhof in our region, yeah, and that was handed out by the governor of the Cape province at the time, Simon van der Stel. So it dates back to 1682, which was just 3 years after the town of Stellenbosch was founded in 1679. So over those farms were really quite big, a few thousand hectares, and over the years they were subdivided. So our estate was part of the original farm going back to 1682, and my grandfather bought this farm in 1942 uh, from the previous owner. And but before I get to that, another piece of interesting history was during the Anglo-Boer War in 1899 to 1902. It was actually used as a remount camp for the British forces. So they would import horses to go to the front, but before they were sent up north, the horses were sort of quarantined and acclimatized here in this area. And we have pictures with the soldiers' tents, and there's still a drinking trough of the horses
Wow.
going back to that part of our history, nearly, well, more than 100 years ago. So it's interesting that this area was used for that. So about 40 years later, my grandfather bought the farm, and then in 1953, my father took over the running of the farm. So uh, he studied winemaking at Stellenbosch University and actually did a master's degree in enology. And very soon realized that he wanted to modernize things. And in 1964, it was still a new thing to have cold fermentation. I think that something in the history of our wine industry in South Africa that should never be underestimated is the invention of cooling down the wine while it is fermenting. And I think that it caused a huge increase in quality of our white wines in particular, because the thing is, if you just leave the fermentation to go naturally, the temperature increases, and that sort of evaporates a lot of the volatile, fruity flavors and esters and so on. And in Europe, they don't need to do that, because in harvest, it's September, October. It's already quite cold in the northern hemisphere, and sometimes their cellars are underground. So there's a natural way of having a cool fermentation. We are in the midst of February, March, so fermentations can become very hot, and the end result is a wine that is quite neutral and bland. So when this was discovered, it increased the quality of our wines tremendously. So my father then installed a cooling plant, that could chill water, that he could circulate over the fermentation tanks. And at that time, and this was now 1964, it was quite revolutionary. And at that time, it was seen as the most modern privately owned wine cellar in South Africa. And also at that time, he bought another vineyard across the valley, which had the wonderful name of Hillbrow, which was a bit funny in the context of Hillbrow in Johannesburg.
Yeah.
But his a neighbor at the time was Paul Sauer of Kanonkop, and he said to him, Frans, but you can't have a farm called the Hillbrow in Stellenbosch. And because this farm has got the wonderful view of the Simonsberg in Stellenbosch, a mountain that was named after Governor Simon van der Stel, who founded the town of Stellenbosch. And because of this view, we called it Simonsig, which means the view of Simon. And that's been our label and our brand ever since. So this started to take on a new meaning in 1968, because at that time it was a customary thing that you had a winery on your farm, you made wine and then sold it to the handful of big wine merchants who bought the wine in bulk and then bottled the wine under their own labels. So we're talking now companies like Stellenbosch Farmers Winery, Distillers Corporation, and KWV who could export it for it. And but the minimum wine price was then controlled by legal means. It was set by the KWV that you couldn't sell wine below a certain minimum price, and it was actually enforced by law. And it was very low if you look back, and my father bought a new farm. He modernized the cellars and soon realized that he cannot make it financially viable if he had to sell wine in bulk. Because at that time, the bulk wine price was 9 cents per liter. And he decided that he must add value and start to bottle his own wine under the Simonsig label. So that was in 1968. So 2 years ago, we celebrated our 50th anniversary of the birth year of Simonsig Estate wine, so which was a huge milestone. Because if you go back to that era, there were only 4 other privately owned estates in Stellenbosch who had their own label, who bottled their own wines under their own label. So it was a very daring thing to do, because on the other hand, you were still in the market with the most of your wine every year to be sold to the merchants, and then they could see you as competition. So what happened then was that with a very small beginning, Simonsig had 3 different white wines: a Steen, which we still do today under the Chenin Blanc label, a Riesling, and a Claret Blanche. And then the first red wine was a Pinotage in 1970. But it was very hard to sell those wines, and he realized that it's the biggest problem of the whole process is not making the wine and bottling it. And so he started a mail order business. So he would send newsletters to an address list all over the country, and then we would receive the orders by post over the country. So I remember that vividly, how December holidays, or we would take the lorry with lots of cases of wine and put it down in an asbestos shed down at Kulenhof station, just down the road from us. So fantastic memories if you think how humbly the business started. It was not possible actually to sell wine from your own cellar door, and because he loved traveling, and in 1969 and 70 he did extensive travels in Europe and France, specifically, also Germany and Italy and so on. And on one of these trips, he was traveling with his good friend Neil Hubert, who was the owner of Speer Wine Estate in those days. Mm-hmm. And they came back with the idea to start the Stellenbosch Wine Route, and which happened in 1971. So next year, the Wine Route of Stellenbosch will be 50 years old, which is also a big milestone. But it was uphill battle all the way, and the only thing that actually wanted to do is to get wine lovers and consumers to get in their cars and drive out to the wine farms and buy wine directly from the cellar. But it was such an unheard of concept, and it took them quite some time to get it off the ground. And along the way, they roped in the energetic Spot Sperling of Delheim, who was one of the wineries bottling their own wines already. And the three of them are definitely seen today as the fathers of the whole wine route concept, because that was the first wine route in South Africa. And it's been a very successful concept. Every single wine region nowadays have their own wine route, and it also generated a lot of tourism, which is now perhaps one of the Western Cape's biggest employers, as well as in earning a huge income and foreign currency.
Well, Johan, I must say, I think that was the understatement of the year to say it was very successful. I think, as you know, if you travel abroad and stuff like that, and South Africa's whole wine tourism industry and the whole concept that your father created there is absolutely unique in the world. There's nowhere like it. I mean, I've been to many places, and you always expect, because coming from the Western Cape, you expect other regions to be the same, but there's no comparison. And I don't think that people always appreciate how unique our wine route experience actually is.
Yes, definitely. And well, the one thing that I don't think you could have foreseen it at that time, but more recently, the food and wine pairing and the combination has really found fantastic expression here in the winelands. If you only look at the list of top 10 restaurants in the country, how often you find that quite a few of them are situated on wine estates, and that is in reinforcing the whole concept that wine should always be enjoyed with food, and the culinary standards and the quality of the restaurants in the Western Cape is just fantastic. It's absolutely world class, which is also a feather in the cap of the wine industry, and especially here in our region in Stellenbosch.
Absolutely. Johan, you're talking about the whole history and everything. Your obviously the thing that keeps everything going is the wine. So, what is your? How would you sum up your winemaking philosophy? And can you tell us a bit more also about the wines that you are producing?
Yes, I think the one wine that Simonsig is definitely the best known for is the Kaapse Vonkel Méthode Cap Classique, which also has a lovely history, because my father also on one of his travels went to Champagne and came back with the idea of making a South African bottle-fermented sparkling wine. He was actually quite frustrated at that time that we had very few grape varieties, and so he had a Steen, he had a Riesling, and a Claret Blanche, and that was basically the limit of the different wine styles that he could make. So he thought, well, he can do the sparkling wine version of a Chenin Blanc, because we had no Chardonnay and we had no Pinot Noir at the time available in South Africa. So in 1971, he made the first Kaapse Vonkel using Chenin Blanc, which is what they do along the Loire Valley. And we couldn't call it champagne. I think that was actually a good thing in retrospect. So we had to come up with a name, and came up with Kaapse Vonkel, which means Cape Sparkle. And for 10 years, Simonsig Kaapse Vonkel was the only Méthode Champenoise made in South Africa. So that is definitely one of our main focus areas. So we have the Kaapse Vonkel Brut, which is a blend of Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier. We do a Brut Rosé, which is also three different Pinot varieties, mainly Pinot Noir. There's about 1/3 of Pinotage and a little bit of Pinot Meunier. Then we also have two satin nectar wines, which is slightly sweeter, so in the demi-sec category, which were launched relatively recently, with the South African market now growing, and the as the middle class and people in the earning better income, they are definitely growing their interest in wine. So the slightly sweeter version, which in South Africa is called satin nectar, or you can refer to it as demi-sec, is growing in popularity, and I think it's a fantastic way of introducing a whole new generation to wine. And then, last but not least, our prestige cuvée is a Blanc de Blanc called Cuvée Royale. So that's made from 100% Chardonnay, and spends about 5 years on the lees in the bottle before it is released. So that's the sparkling wine Cap Classique category. Then we do the full spectrum of red wines. At the top, we have the Malan family selection, where I think the most famous one is the Simonsig Tiara, which is a Bordeaux style blend, and mainly based on Cabernet, because I'm a firm believer of Cabernet Sauvignon in Stellenbosch. But I'll tell you a bit more about that. We have the Radial Pinotage, which is a single vineyard Pinotage, and then a single vineyard Syrah called the Merendal Syrah. And last but not least, the wine I named after my father called Frans Malan. And that is a Cape blend. So it's a Cabernet, Pinotage, Cabernet, and Merlot. Then, if you look at the white wines, we have a very strong relationship with Chenin, because it goes back to our roots right from the beginning in 1968. So we've been making Simonsig Steen, or the Chenin Blanc, for more than 50 years. And, all over the world, it is still our most popular wine. We also do a wooded Chenin Blanc, which is fascinating for me. I love working with that because it comes from the oldest vineyard on the estate, planted in the mid-80s. So within a year or so, I think we'll be part of the old vineyard scheme. So that's more of a wood fermented Chenin. Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, like a Gewürztraminer, which is also one of the wines that date back from the 70s, slightly in a sweeter German Auslese style, but really good with certain types of food. And then, the little bits and pieces that often makes the winemakers happy is wines like the Noble Late Harvest, which is named after my mother, called Van der Leijzer. But again, based on the basis of a Sauternes, so it's Botrytis, Sauvignon Blanc, and Semillon that spend some time in barrel. So that's not a nutshell, but that gives you an impression of the whole portfolio of wines. But before I forget, I mentioned about Stellenbosch Cabernet, and the reason why Simonsig has quite an extensive range is that in the early years we had to sell wines to all the different market segments and niches, and so we were totally independent and not relying on cooperative to sell our wine or the big merchants. So actually we expanded the range, and I think partly in my generation, but I always see it as a future opportunity for the next generation, is to specialize. And one of the things that I realized that Stellenbosch is very blessed in the sense that you can make really, really high quality wine of so many different grape varieties and blends. So from Cap Classique, you can do the Chardonnays and Chenin, and you can do Shiraz and Cabernet. But a few years ago, I sat with a friend and I said, but what is Stellenbosch famous for? And after a few bottles of wine, we actually realized that Cabernet Sauvignon is the variety that does best in Stellenbosch compared to other regions, and that was never really exploited. So in the past few years, we started the Stellenbosch Cabernet Collective, and Christelle is the young, energetic chairman at the moment. And the idea is to take Cabernet Sauvignon as a varietal wine in Stellenbosch and give it its rightful place. Because if you go to Napa Valley in California, they stand for Cabernet and they are famous for Cabernet. And if you go to the US market, the single variety Cabernet is the iconic wine from California, Napa Valley. And quite often in South Africa, we take after the French and we try to do the Bordeaux style blends. So the Cabernet Collective is aiming to give more prominence and do justice to straight Cabernet. So for that reason, we have the Simonsig the Garland, which is a single vineyard straight Cabernet from the slopes of Simonsburg, one of the best wards in the Stellenbosch region for making Cabernet. So that was initiated, and the first garland I made was 2008, and I think it was actually a little bit before its time. At that stage, there was nothing like the Stellenbosch Cabernet Collective, but definitely now our icon wine in the range.
Oh, that's amazing, Johan. Well, your family has had so many achievements, but recently, and I can see from your winemaking philosophy why, is you've recently won the Diners Club Winemaker of the Year award. So, firstly, congratulations on that. And I don't want to take your thunder. Tell us a bit more about what the award's about and how you won.
Yeah, thank you very much. In a year like this, the Diners Club Winemaker of the Year award was definitely like the silver cloud, the silver lining around the dark cloud, because everything was just. I thought about it the other day. It was just a zoom and gloom, and this was a wonderful way to end the year. And the category was for Cap Classique, which is nowadays, there are more than 200 wine cellars producing Cap Classique. So it's a very big category. And so the competition is very strong. So it made it even more special, and we're very grateful about that. The wine that did it for us was the Kaapse Vonkel. It was a 2015 vintage. So the wine was 5 years old at the time of the panel's decision. And the interesting thing is 2015 is generally regarded and rated as one of the best vintages ever. But people tend to think only of red wines. But this is a good proof that even the Cap Classique wines of 2015 were really, really special in terms of quality of the vintage, and those wines tend to come through as time goes on. And I'm a very big lover of older Cap Classique, so I like keeping back some wine still on the lees in the bottle. So we have vintages of Kaapse Vonkel going back to 99, still on its lead, so 20 years later.
Wow.
And every now and again, for one of our vintage days, when we do like an open day for all our older vintages, we disgorge some of the older vintages, like almost like a recently disgorged wine, uh, so that to show people that Cap Classique is really a wine that matures very well. But the wonderful thing about Diners Club is that they've been doing this for 40 years, and it's always about a single category and about a single style of wine in a specific year. So you have to be put your best foot forward for that wine. And the fortunate thing is that the 2015 was just at that perfect stage of its development, where it was a fantastic combination of the freshness of the fruit as well as the development in the bottle that gives it the warm bread yeasty brioche character. So it is really showing beautifully at this stage. Yeah, Andy, I'm very grateful to Diners Club, because apart from the honor of getting the title of Winemaker of the Year, they also sponsor a flight ticket and some prize money, so you can visit any wine destination in the world. So I hope COVID gets over its troubles so we can do a bit of traveling. I haven't decided finally yet where I want to go, but
I just wanted to ask you that. I thought you'd share that secret with us. Where you going?
There's two countries I definitely I've never been to: Chile and Argentina in South America. So that's definitely my first choice at this stage, because they're also in the Southern Hemisphere. And I've heard fantastic reports about the developments there and the quality of the wine. So definitely, I think I can learn a lot there.
Oh, that's interesting. And again, Johan, congratulations with fantastic achievement. Simonsig, you mentioned the wine route and everything. So when people come visit the estate, what can people actually experience, visitors, when they come to the estate?
The after effects of the COVID virus and has actually turned our whole offering here upside down, because we had the Cuvée restaurant here for more than 10 years, and due to the fact that everything was locked down and there are very little tourism happening, we actually closed the restaurant. And at this stage, people can come for a wine tasting, which is actually taking place in the what used to be the restaurant. So a very nice setting, very comfortable and beautiful to sit outside in summer with all the magnificent Stellenbosch mountains around you. And if you sit on our stoop outside, you can actually see all the Stellenbosch mountains as well as Table Mountain. And I've been living here for my whole life, and it was many years until I realized, but there are not many places in Stellenbosch where you can see Table Mountain as well as the whole amphitheater of all Stellenbosch mountains. So it is a spectacular place to be. We do cellar tours, and also we do platters for people who want to eat something light, cheese platter or a charcuterie platter. If people make a special booking and an arrangement, we can always do a special disgorging experience, which means that each person gets its own opportunity to disgorge a bottle of Kaapse Vonkel by hand. Wow. And that's quite an exhilarating experience. And then afterwards, you can take that bottle with you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, you're mentioning the coronavirus, and there's actually two things I forgot to ask you. You mentioned that your wines are sold worldwide, obviously, but now with the well, my question has two parts. Firstly, where are your wines sold? And secondly, with the coronavirus has forced all of us to really look at your business models and rethink it. Do you have any new ideas or changes in mind in this regard?
Yeah, before I get to that, I just realized we also have a vineyard here planted as a labyrinth. You know, a labyrinth is different to a maze. The maze is the one that you get lost in, but a labyrinth is you walk to the center, and it's like a spiritual journey. So sometimes you see it quite often on the floors of the big cathedrals
Mm.
in France. So this is a vineyard planted with Cabernet Sauvignon right next to the tasting room. So if people come here, just uh, go and have a look. Um, yeah, export-wise, we mainly focus on the traditional countries in Europe,
Mhm.
but through the years you build up a network. So we are selling wine in up to 50 countries across the world nowadays, and sometimes you actually stunned by the fact that you get inquiries from very far off places like Kazakhstan and Estonia and so on. So it's wonderful
Wow.
that South African wines actually become like an ambassador for the country. And I think that generates interest in tourism and people wanting to visit the country. So as far as the changes in our approach is concerned, definitely it's not possible to travel. So we had to find other ways of getting in touch with uh, our consumers and our international partners as well. So a lot of these interactions have taken place via Zoom conferences, and actually our annual Vintage Day was done online, where we still sold 6 packs of two different wines. One was a Tiara, a vertical of Tiara, and the vertical of the Kaapse Vonkel. And then people could link up with a panel discussion where we discussed the 6 vintages of these two wines. So that was a very novel experience for us. But all of a sudden, you see people tuning in from Belgium, or they even from Japan. People followed the tasting online, which is just shows you creating new opportunities. Definitely during the lockdown period, online sales was
Mhm.
basically the only uh, route to market we could follow, and the Save South African Wine concept has put a lot of focus on the plight of wine farms. So our online business really did exceptionally well, and we are very, very grateful for those people who supported us when there was nothing else going on. We couldn't even export in the early part of the lockdown in April.
Well, this is amazing. When we started that group, people phoned in from all over the world and posted from all over the world. And one guy said that he was in a supermarket somewhere, I think it was in England, and he saw somebody buying a New Zealand wine, and he walked to him and said, "Go put back that wine and go fetch a South African wine." So I thought that was a good story.
Well, I think we have to drink a toast to all the expat South Africans who really came to the fore and to the joint forces and promoted South African wine. And I just want to thank them, and definitely want to encourage them to never stop doing that, because the wine industry maybe is the easiest way for them to link back to their homeland. And secondly, it does employ a lot of people. It's the livelihood of some 300,000 people
Right.
in South Africa, which is enormous employer, and people rely on the wine industry for the living, basically.
Well, thank you for that, Johan, because I think that's right. I think one of the things that certainly opened my eyes is how well our wine industry is appreciated overseas, almost uh, 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 sometimes like almost more than in your own country. I personally realized that our wine industry has had a major impact, and like I said, the expats really supported it, but so did overseas buyers. Which was consumers that said they went out and bought South African wines, and I think with the tourism season, I don't know what you guys are finding, but it looks like the tourism season is going to be still a very dry season in terms of tourists coming this year. So that momentum needs to keep going. The guys need to keep supporting.
Yeah, I think the restrictions on flights and now there's signs of this big second wave in Europe, even in
Mm.
South Africa. The restrictions will definitely be with us for the foreseeable future, and hopefully the vaccine could start turning the tides. But that's perhaps also not going to happen overnight. But wine is something that when the restaurants closed down, I think a lot of people started to dine in instead of dine out.
Mm.
And what we've seen, which I'm still battling to fully explain, is the fact that we've seen that people are buying up on the export market. So it looks like they say, okay, in a restaurant, they would have paid X, and are they willing to spend a bit more on a bottle of wine because they compare it to the prices they were paying in restaurants? So we've seen that the definitely a higher price point achieved by the wine by wines overseas. So that's very positive.
Well, that's very good news. Is what's interesting to me is you mentioned the online sales, and the buzzword is direct to consumer. But I just looked earlier this week at Amazon sales, how that's increased. Not just for wine, but obviously for everything is going direct to consumer. Do you think this online trend is this something that you guys are investing in to get wine to consumer? You obviously already have an online store, but is there ways to make that better? And and also the other thing is the communication to the consumer. I think what this whole thing has opened that you mentioned is that you can actually, when you're selling to a distributor, you don't necessarily communicate to your end consumer, whereas this is giving you the opportunity to maybe talk to people that are actually enjoying your wine.
Yeah, on the domestic market, we have a very strong footprint through our, the conventional distribution channels with all the retailers out there, and also both the off consumption as well as the on consumption. And I think we respect that because those people have been our supporters and our loyal customers for a very long time.
Of course.
So it is never our idea to go to the market and undercut those people. That would be a very um, disastrous thing to do. But quite often, some of the retailers have their own online platforms because they are closer to their regionally to their customer, and so in that respect, it's something that we work with them, and our own online business was very handy during the lockdown period, but then it was also not in competition with
Mm.
our retail partners. The interesting thing is now you go to overseas, you go to Europe, where there's no borders anymore, and no taxes and so on. So there we also have people importing our wines and selling it into their markets. But the one dilemma we have seen is that the online business interferes in certain countries with our importers business. So we're still finding our feet because things
Mm.
change so rapidly that you have to make sort of think on your feet to keep up with the rapidly changing market situation. And the same thing applies, the relationships you build with those traditional long-standing partners are very, very valuable, and we have to respect that, not to disrupt
Well, that's
the
a
relationship.
I
Yes.
think that's important, Johan. What you just said is basically comes to the next question is that you keep learning and you know it's a journey as the world is changing at such a rapid rate, and you know it's having that balance of respecting old relationships, but also embracing the new in some way that can be a win-win. It's you know a long-term sustainable solution. But that brings to my question is your wine journey has been quite interesting and you obviously had a long wine journey. What is the most important thing that you've learned?
Um, you know, I think I always believe that you must respect wine. That I think is the basis of your approach to wine. But the most important thing that I realized is that never underestimate the importance of the tiniest little thing on the quality and the end result of the wine. You know, when you taste wine and you smell wine, your nose and your senses can detect certain flavors that are measured in nanograms, like a millionth of a gram. So you are so the wine and changes in the wine is detected by your senses and in minor microscopic quantities. So don't even something small that you think is not important can have an effect. Yeah, I think that's part of the respect. Don't just treat it like um, an everyday thing. It is still something very, very special.
Well, Johan, that was spoken like the winemaker of the year. That's awesome. Um, can you give us your very own wine quote?
You know, when I thought about this, and it sort of adds on to what I've just said about the small things that matter. But the difference between a good wine and a great wine is the compound effect of doing many small things better. So it sums up the Japanese have got a philosophy called kaizen, which means incremental improvement.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take last year's increment with this year's increment, it all adds up. And I think that uh, is what experience brings to you, and spending a long time um, with the wines that you make. It's like honing your skills, but also um, it's mastering the craft over a long time.
Johan, I mean, that's awesome. And thank you so much for spending the time with us. If people want to get hold of you or they want to get know more about Simonsig or they want to come and visit, how do they get hold of you guys?
Well, you can look at our website, simonsig.co.za. You can, all our contact details are there, and they can get in touch. The tasting room is open 7 days a week, and except for just a few religious holidays, Christmas Day, Good Friday, and New Year's Day. So you're most welcome to visit. We firmly believe that the wine always tastes best under the roof it was made. So especially in this time when uh, we've all got a bit of cabin fever after this year. Get in the car and get some fresh air in the winelands. It's a beautiful place to visit. As you mentioned earlier, I think the most beautiful winelands in the whole world. So you're welcome to contact us and come and enjoy the day. And it's often not only about the wine, but it's about the experience.
Johan, thank you so much. We appreciate the time you spent and have a fantastic rest of 2020 and good luck for next year.
Yeah, thank you very much for been a very interesting talk. And as we sit here, I think in just a bit more than a month, we'll be harvesting 2021. So it's almost as I'm getting a few butterflies in my tummy if I have to think about that. But after 38 vintages, I know what to expect, but it's a mixture of excitement and tension.
Thank you for supporting our show. If you would like to get more exposure for your business, please have a look at our sponsorship options. Thanks again for supporting About the Winelands. Please follow us on YouTube and on our social media channels. All details and links are in the description.